This is Dr. Craig Seal, and this is the final in our series on organizational culture and change. In the first video, we looked at the concept of culture, climate, and values, and their implications in terms of organizations. In the second video, we looked at the concept of organizational change and some of the sources of resistance to change, particularly individual and organizational resistance. In this final video, we're looking at one of the methods whereby organizations can actually implement change, and one of the common theories and models used is the concept of what's called force field analysis. And in the concept of force field analysis, the assumption is that organizations are in a perpetual state of equilibrium, where you have these driving forces pushing one way and these resisting forces pushing another. And it creates a certain balance. For example, if you take a particular person's weight, that individual's weight is decided in large part based on an equilibrium, on how much is coming in, how much going out, and the pressures and resistance in terms of the two forces that keep a person at a certain target body weight, which is wherever they are right now. The same regards, if you think about our political situation, that there are these driving and restraining forces in terms of things like a fiscal cliff and a budget crisis and sequester, all of which factor into where we are today. In the same regards, organizations are much akin to this, and that there are different forces in organizations, some advocating change and some pushing against change. In terms of academia, let's think about the concept of online education. There are driving forces, forces that are pressuring departments and schools to want to adopt more of an online presence, and some of those are fairly common. There's competition right now with online resources. There are limitations in terms of class sizes and schedules, which is pushing for potential online education. And there's certain faculty members who are more attuned to the concept of technology and wanting to be able to utilize it in terms of providing teaching and learning environments. And so all of those are sort of driving or pushing forces. But where an organization actually is in terms of online isn't just the driving forces, it's the driving versus resistance. And there are some resistive forces. In certain educational institutions, there's going to be faculty and administrators that are going to push against the idea of online. We're going to lose control. We're not going to be able to have a quality product. We're not comfortable with the technology itself. It's something that I don't want to do. I feel like I'm better face to face. And so these driving forces, say competition, technology, interest, are working against these resisting forces in terms of who owns this, what's the quality going to be like, is the technology going to be available, is this something that I'm going to have to do, and these two groups move together in terms of a force field. That sets the equilibrium. It basically sets the policy for online education in any particular organization. And some, that policy is fairly broad, where they may do a lot of online or even completely online education. For others, it's going to be extremely narrow, where they may not have any or only using it in sort of a hybrid sense with traditional brick and mortar types of classes. And so that's what force field analysis is these two opposing forces for any particular change. We talked before about the concept of organizational change and individual and organizational resistance. Force field analysis asks you to ascertain what those sources of resistance are and what those particular pressures for change are. And looking together, that provides you opportunities for making a change. Probably one of the most famous models in terms of force field is the originator is Kurt Lewin, and he had a three-step process for organizational change: unfreeze, move, and refreeze. And so the issue for Kurt Lewin in this particular model of change is first you have to unfreeze. Right now we're set at an equilibrium point. We need to move that equilibrium point one way or the other. And part of the way to do that is to increase the strength of driving forces. So let's again take the idea of online education. One of the driving forces could be potential classroom limitations. So right now we have a certain number of classrooms available to us, a certain number of faculty, and yet a lot of students who want to take particular sections. That by itself starts to become a driving force. And so the more students and the less classrooms and the less faculty available, that increases the strength of the driver, increases the likelihood that we're actually going to need to offer some online opportunities. You could decrease the strength of resistance. For example, one resistance to online education could be technology, in the sense of either we're not familiar with it, or is it going to be accessible to all our students? And so as technology gets better, more user-friendly, as it becomes more accessible, that resistance is decreased in terms of strength. And so now you can start to potentially move that equilibrium point. Another issue is to add a new force. So for example, in my case, jury duty. Well, now I can't be in class. And so the question is, I either cancel class or we find a substitute, or we have to come up with some other method. So now we've taken this issue of online education and we've added this new force, jury duty, which now helps to move from one point to another. And so this idea of increasing the driving forces, reducing the resisting force, or adding a new force all help to unfreeze or unfetter and then move this opportunity where perhaps now we can actually implement some level of online education. Once you move, then you get to the point where do we want these new habits to be? How much online education do we want? How much change in terms of policy and procedure? What kind of shifts in terms of our compensation and benefits? So once you're able to move the system, then you have to sort of refreeze it at the point that you want, that you're comfortable with. In our case, for our class, the issue is, well, can we do some kind of hybrid, where we'll do a couple of sessions online, but then we'll come back with a couple of face-to-face sessions, and so we're going to do this sort of hybrid model over the last part of the quarter, where there's some online components and some face-to-face components, and see if putting them both together provides a better, more enriching academic experience for both the faculty member, but more particularly for the students. Change is the same way. Unfreeze, move, and refreeze. Take me, for example, in terms of, I talked about the weight issue. And so if I want to lose weight, I would need to see, well, what's the purpose? What's the drivers for potential weight change? You know, there may be health consequences. There may be body image consequences. And so those would be the potential driving factors. What are the resisting factors? Well, like certain kinds of food, or I don't want to work out, or I don't have time. And so those push up against the driving forces. And so what needs to happen is more pressure on the driving, less pressure on the resistance in order to move, in order to create new habits where maybe eating healthier or maybe working out more provides a new set point. And then those get refreezed, meaning now it becomes a habit. And those habits set a new equilibrium point. So what force field analysis does is it asks you to take a look at the organization, figure out what the drivers and resistance points are, see if you can increase the drivers, decrease the resistance, and move that equilibrium point from point A to point B, and then re-solidify it. New habits, new process, new procedures. Much like what happened here with our particular course in needing to move to a hybrid with some online components, perhaps that's now a new normal where future classes would have always available lectures, PowerPoints, and reading materials to help supplement what then happens within the actual class time and allows for different kinds of activities to occur in the class time that may not have been able to be done before because, quite frankly, a space and time constraint. Force field analysis, one way of examining organizational change. Thank you for your time and attention. This concludes our series on culture, climate, and values, organizational change, individual and organizational resistance, and finally the concept of force field analysis in order to implement potential organizational changes. Thank you for your time.